I think we can start. So to do it well, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Inshallah, we will be doing a community Q&A forum with Dr. Niloufar Humayun speaking on maintaining physical health during COVID-19. So just a little bit about Dr. Niloufar. She's a board certified in internal medicine and obesity medicine. She's currently working as a bariatric physician at a weight loss clinic. And her talk today will focus on maintaining physical health during this coronavirus pandemic. She'll share tips on healthy lifestyle habits that you can adopt while staying home. As this is a Q&A forum, please feel free to ask your questions by typing them into the chat box, and inshallah, she can answer the questions. So inshallah, if Dr. Niloufar wants to start the presentation.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, Sabia. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I hope you all are doing well. So the topic that I will be talking about today is maintaining physical health during COVID-19. So I basically want to start with the definition of health. How do you define health? So health basically is a combination of physical, mental, and social well-being. And it refers not only to the absence of disease, but the ability to recover and bounce back from illness and other problems. So just to give you kind of an overview of basically what are the essential components of, of health. So we have physical health, on which I'll be focusing on. And then I'll be basically kind of talking about nutrition and the other components such as macronutrients, micronutrients, the fluids, and then talking about healthy habits, which basically will include physical activity, exercise, sleep, stress management, personal hygiene, and then social health. And then, mental health, just to kind of make this overview complete, includes mindfulness, building self-confidence and self-esteem, emotional intelligence. And then we have spiritual health, which includes having gratitude, meditation, forgiveness, and then prayers. And then we have social health. So I have kind of broadly kind of classified them separately, but they are all kind of interrelated. So if one gets affected, the other aspect of the health gets affected as well. So talking about physical health, it's basically a condition of the body, taking into consideration everything from the absence of disease to the fitness level. And then nutrition is the process by which a living organism actually assimilates food and uses it for growth and for replacement of tissues. So going a little bit more detail into the nutrition, we basically have three main categories. We are talking about macronutrients, micronutrients, and the fluids. Now, the macronutrients, as the name implies, these are the major components of our nutrition. And these include carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Now, carbohydrates, they include about 45 to 65% of our total calorie intake. And they're important because they are fuel for the body. They actually, the fiber component of these carbohydrates actually suppresses the appetite. Then coming to the fats. Now, fats actually, they comprise of about 20 to 30% of our total calorie intake. And they are important because they are an important source of energy for us. Proteins actually, they constitute about 15 to 35% of the energy intake. And they're important because they play an important role for our immune system. They control our appetite and as well as the muscle synthesis. And then moving on to the micronutrients, as the name implies, these are needed in very small amount, but they have a huge implication on our health. Vitamins are important because they are responsible for energy production, regulation of cell and tissue function. Minerals are actually the elements that originate in the earth. And just to name a few, we have calcium, we have magnesium, we have sodium. And then there are trace elements, and they are also needed in small amounts. Examples are fluoride, manganese, zinc. And then moving on to the fluids. Now, almost 60% of our body is made up of water. And it's basically, we have a small amount that is lost daily, and it's important to maintain those reserves. And so at least, taking in about 64 ounces, which is roughly about 8 to 10 glasses of water a day is important. Now, just to kind of give you, what carbohydrates basically include. It's a broader category, and that includes, a variety of carbohydrates that we have. I mean, I don't want to scare you by going into the intricate details and the complexity, but it's important to know at large what are the different options that we have and how to pick and choose. So we have simple and complex carbohydrates, and so basically the area that really interests us is if you look at the right side of the flow sheet. It's basically the fibers under the complex carbohydrates that are important for us. And the reason being, they have a low glycemic load and they stay in our system for a longer period of time. They do not make us hungry much faster. So we have healthy carbs and we have unhealthy carbs. Healthy carbs are the fruits and vegetables, the legumes, and the whole grains, and the unhealthy carbs would be the refined sugars. Just like, we have carbohydrate category, we also have categories of fats. Now, the area that basically interests us is the area of the polyunsaturated and the monounsaturated, which is again the right side of the flow sheet that I'm showing you right now. And among that, we have the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids that are also important. Now, the healthy fats, they include the olive oil, avocados, nuts, sesame seeds, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, etc., just to name a few. And then unhealthy fats would be the fried food, the vegetable shortening. And then we have our last macronutrient, which is the proteins. Now, proteins are basically divided into essential and non-essential amino acids. They're called essential because our bodies are not able to make them, and so we have to get them from an external source. So the healthy source of these proteins would be fish, eggs, dairy, beans, nuts, and seeds. And then the unhealthy sources would be processed meat and excess of red meat. And then moving on to our micronutrients, which are basically the vitamins, and they are also divided into two categories, basically water-soluble vitamins, which include vitamin B and vitamin C, and then fat-soluble vitamins include A, D, and E, and K, and they're called fat-soluble because we need fats to help them in their absorption. And then the fluids for our body. So as you can see that out of the total body weight, about 50 to 70% is water. And out of that 50 to 70%, 2/3 is actually present intracellularly, and 1/3 is extracellularly. So it has a huge impact on our body. Now, moving on to from the nutrients onto our intestinal barrier. So it's important that we know about our intestinal barrier, because that's a huge army that we have inside our body. It's actually a gateway between the external and the internal environment. And so whatever we feed, whatever we eat, that basically affects this army. And either we can make it strong or we can make it weak. And this army actually has multiple layers, and which includes healthy bacteria. It has, it includes chemical barriers. There are physical barriers. Then there are immunological barriers. So when we are eating unhealthy food, what happens is that these bacteria here, they get affected. They're not able to function properly. They help in digestion as well. And then the other thing that happens is that you can see these junctions between these cells, they get affected. And we turn our basically gut into what is called as leaky gut. And that leads to the absorption of very unhealthy ingredients. And so basically that's why it's said that all the diseases, they actually begin in the gut. So just briefly talking about some of the principles of nutrition, and they basically involve, behavioral aspects, and then the selection of a particular kind of nutrient. So it's important to have a good breakfast because it's a fuel for the day. Try not to skip meals on regular days because that leads to hypoglycemia and then insulin surges. Try to pay attention to the portion sizes. Big portion sizes can have adverse effects on our body. Then the distribution of macro and micronutrients is also important. Diet should be actually high in fibers, containing fruits and vegetables, whole grains, because it tends to lower our blood pressure. Then avoid overcooking these vegetables, as most of the nutrients, they are lost if we cook them for a prolonged period of time. So 10 to 12 minutes should be enough for these vegetables if you are planning to cook them. And then eat on scheduled times. Have a routine, which is important. Then another important principle is to avoid the processed foods, the refined sugars, because they tend to increase the cravings. And then the other principle is avoid buying junk food. If you don't have it at home, you will not reach out for it when you're having cravings. Try to drink before having your meals, and then avoid eating 3 hours before bedtime. Try to take small bites and chew your food properly, and that helps in digestion, and you are actually helping that army that is inside your gut. And don't work while eating. So actually that can act as a distraction and can lead to overeating and decreased fullness as well. Avoid too much caffeine as it can lead to palpitations, anxiety, etc. Milk products, for example, yogurt, actually is an important component, should be an important component of our diet, because it can augment the natural killer cell activity, which are the immunological cells in our body, and it tends to decrease the risk of respiratory tract infections. Some of the other principles that I would like to mention is that, in the time of stress, it's important to increase your protein requirement. So foods like milk, eggs, yogurt, fish can be very beneficial. Try to eat small, frequent meals when you can. And then another important area to keep in mind is try to control the weight, as obesity is a pro-inflammatory state, and it puts you, or it makes you susceptible to infections, especially during this time, during the times of COVID-19 infection. And then add more prebiotic and probiotic containing foods to boost your healthy bacteria. Yogurt, kefir are some of the examples. And then, it's important to include micronutrients. To mention a few, we have vitamin E, C, vitamin A, which has beta carotene, vitamin D. It's basically known to decrease the risk of chronic diseases, especially respiratory diseases. Zinc inhibits the respiratory tract infection, and it's also important to introduce certain herbs in your diet plan. And then there are non-animal protein sources for our vegetarian members in the community who don't like to eat animal proteins. It's important to be mindful that there are many vegetarian sources. For example, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, eggs, quinoa. They're all important sources of protein. And then at the same time, we also have non-animal sources of fats. For example, chia seeds, we have nuts, walnuts, olives, avocados. They're all non-animal sources of fats. So just moving on to some of the immune boosters that you can add to your diet, especially in these times when our immune system tends to be compromised because of the stress. Vitamin A is actually a major antioxidant, and it is called an anti-infective vitamin. And I just want to, don't want to scare you by giving you a list of these items, but just to make you mindful of these are the options that are available. And if you have them at home, please make use of them so it can help boost your immunity. And then we have vitamin C, important antioxidant, and that can actually reduce the severity and incidence of pneumonia, which is a major complication of COVID-19 and helps protect against sepsis. So just to name a few of the vitamin C rich foods, we have citrus fruits, berries, bell peppers, broccoli, etc. And then we have vitamin D, which is also critical to fight viral and bacterial infections and to protect from sepsis. Light is the best source of vitamin D, but when we're talking about nutrition, fish is a very important source. Cow's milk and dairy is an important source. Eggs, mushrooms are important sources of vitamin D. Vitamin E is also a potent antioxidant. Again, is present in pumpkin seeds, nuts, green leafy vegetables. Glutathione is another immune booster. It is actually called a master antioxidant, and it's critical for removing free radicals and inhibits the viral replication. And some of the foods that contain glutathione are the cruciferous veggies, for example, kale, cauliflower, broccoli, and you can just eyeball the list I have in front of you. Magnesium is another immune booster. It helps us feel calmer and support the immunity. And then again, legumes, nuts, seeds, leafy greens, and whole grains. They are rich in magnesium. Another immune booster is quercetin, which is actually a zinc ionophore, and it inhibits viral replication. And the food sources which are rich in quercetin are raw onions, red apples, red grapes, and these are basically very commonly available fruits that everyone has at their home. And then moving on to probiotics and omega-3 essential fatty acids, they're also very important immune boosters. And probiotics play an important role, especially the fermented foods. They're rich in probiotics, yogurt, kefir, and then omega-3 fatty acids. As I've mentioned, fish is an important source. Seaweeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts. They're all rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Then zinc basically is an important mineral which tends to boost our immune system. It inhibits viral replication. And again, the foods that are rich in zinc, like pumpkin seeds, beans, sesame seeds, garbanzo beans, cashews, eggs, and they are all rich in zinc. And then, not to forget about our spices that we use on a daily basis, ginger, garlic, turmeric, capsaicin, and also herbs, rosemary, thyme, basil. They're all immune boosting nutrients. And then, prebiotics, they are actually, they act like fertilizers for probiotics. And green leafy vegetables and high fiber food, they're also, high in prebiotics. So foods like asparagus, carrots, garlic, leek, raw onions, etc. They're also high in probiotics. Supplements, they are, some people like to take supplements, but natural food is the best source. However, if you do plan on taking these supplements, the downside is that they are usually not regulated, but look for the labels like USP, NSF, or the GMP. Again, I don't mean to scare you by showing you this grocery list, but I'm just trying to make you mindful of when you go out to buy food, just try to keep that classification or the general outline of the categories of the food. Do you have enough carbs? Do you have enough fats? Do you have enough protein source? Do you have enough mineral source? Do you have enough vitamin source in your list? So it has to be a complete list, and so that you can have a complete, a balanced diet. And then, science has taught us these principles, but what our Prophet ﷺ taught us 1400 years ago was a golden principle. And I want to quote here that what he said was, the son of Adam never fills a vessel worse than his stomach. And the son of Adam only needs a few bites that would sustain him. And it's actually, and science is actually proving that we actually, amount of calories we consume is actually double the amount of calories we require half the amount of calories that we are actually consuming. So the son of Adam only needs a few bites that would sustain him, but if he insists, 1/3 should be reserved for his food, another 1/3 for his drink, and the last third for his breathing. So quickly now moving on to the healthy habits, and I know that I'm kind of short on time, so I'll be kind of very brief as far as the healthy habits are concerned. So starting with physical activity and exercise, it's important to know what is physical activity. Is actually any body movement that which is produced by skeletal muscles, and it requires energy expenditure. So it could be walking, it could be biking, doing household chores, or taking stairs. But when you talk about exercise, it's actually planned, repetitive activity for a specific purpose. So what's recommended is actually doing 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, which is about 150 minutes a week. And then should be combined with resistance training of at least twice a week, and which will prevent muscle loss. And then there is actually a mnemonic for how to set your goal for exercise at home, and it's called SMART goals. So be specific in your goals. In a specific day of the week to exercise, mark your calendar. Then measure your goal with time. Achievable, you should have achievable goals, both in type of exercise and as well as time. And then you should have realistic plan. You start slow if you're a beginner, and you set goals, hard goals if you have exercised before. And then it has to be time bound. So you start with 150 minutes a week, and you can go up to 300 minutes a week. Then stress is actually another area that needs attention, especially at this time of the year. It's a state of mental or emotional strain which results from adverse circumstances. So acute stress is actually healthy because it tends to boost our immune system. But when we talk about chronic stress, that is actually problematic because it tends to lower our immune function. And then how do we manage our stress? So basically, quickly just going over some of the tips, feel your feelings. You have to admit what's actually happening and then kind of redirect your thoughts. And then take one moment at a time, what you can do right now. Be mindful and then see what you can do about it. And physical activity is important. Stick to a routine. And then active stress reduction is important, like doing zikr, reading, conversation with good friends. Do something that is meaningful rather than something you can't achieve. And then look ways to help out in the community. And then not to forget the foods which basically reduce the stress level. We have, avocados, there are green leafy vegetables, dark chocolates, there are oranges, there are whole grain carbs, there are nuts, we have milk, omega-3 containing foods, and then potassium containing foods, then we have green teas. Now all these foods, they actually tend to lower the stress hormones, which is the cortisol, and they also tend to raise the dopamine, serotonin, which are basically stress lowering hormones. And then, comes personal hygiene. I'm sure all of you have heard a lot about it. So I'll just briefly mention hand washing, respiratory hygiene, and then avoid touching face, and then cleaning and disinfecting the affected surfaces. Then comes, sleep. It's important to have a good night's sleep. Roughly 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night is important. And it's important to have good sleep hygiene. And what does that mean? Basically, you should have fixed timings to sleep. Avoid caffeinated beverages after lunchtime. Avoid prolonged use of light-emitting screens before bedtime. Exercising regularly, meditation, and of course, keeping in mind the sunnah way of sleeping. Eat healthy, and then minimize the daytime naps. Then healthy habits, basically in terms of social health, it's important to have negative, to stay away from the negative interactions. The negative social relationships actually increase the cortisol levels and they depress the immune function. And it's important to have love and positivity surrounding oneself, because it then tends to strengthen our immune system. So basically, in summary, it's important to pay attention to one's health. Keep good source of immune supportive nutrients, both quantity and quality matters. And then have a positive attitude. It can be helpful to tackle the negative health effect of quarantine. And, I just want to mention here that our religion teaches us very important principles to lead a healthy life. And the Prophet ﷺ trained his companions based on the methodology of Noble Quran that involved purification of soul, enlightenment of the mind, and preservation and strengthening of the body. And he achieved wonderful results. So it's important to reflect and learn from it. So I just want to end here, and I'll be happy to take questions if there are any.
So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat box. So I just have a question to start us off while we wait for other people. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to avoid snacking? Just like, sitting down and snacking, it's a very easy thing to do. What's the best way to avoid that?
So generally, if one thing would be to go for healthy snacks. We generally recommend that to have small frequent meals. Main meal like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But then in between, you're allowed to snack. But what you're snacking, actually, the quality of the food, that matters. If you're snacking on chocolates, yes, you have to avoid that. But you can snack on nuts. You can snack on fruits. You can snack on any healthy source that's available. But if that is something that you want to avoid, then just keep yourself busy. Don't keep those snacks, at home during that time. So that's basically the best way to deal with that.
Okay, so I have another question here. It's what is prebiotics and how are they different from probiotics?
So prebiotics are actually the fertilizers. They are actually the nutrients which help the probiotics or our healthy bacteria grow. And as I mentioned so they actually act as fertilizers. Probiotics are the ones that are actually doing the job, and prebiotics are the ones that are helping the probiotics do their job. That's basically what they are.
So if you're getting a probiotic pill, does that include the prebiotics in it?
Not necessarily. And that's the other thing that I want to mention, that the probiotics that we take in the pill form may not be the best way of taking it. And that's why when you're talking to gastroenterologist or you're looking at the medical recommendations, they don't generally recommend taking probiotics. I mean, I personally believe that, taking probiotics and prebiotics in the natural form, like yogurt, there are other fermented foods. I mentioned kefir, prebiotics. I mentioned green leafy vegetables. I mentioned, grains, etc. Fruits and vegetables. They are important sources. So they kind of you not only get the benefits of prebiotics and probiotics, but you also get so many other benefits. They are the sources of vitamin. They are the sources of so many other nutrients for our body.
Okay, I have another question here. It's, can you please repeat the tips for reducing stress?
Tips for reducing stress. Okay, so I can go back to my talk. All right, so stress management would be to, it always starts by, as I mentioned earlier, that you want to start by eating healthy. Because, just like I showed you, the gut barrier, of which involves so many bacteria, the chemical layer, the immunological layer, when that gut gets leaky, there are various chemicals that are absorbed into the circulation. And basically they reach the brain as well, and they tend to adversely affect our mood, and that leads to various mental issues as well. So eating a healthy diet is the most important thing. Then you have to feel your feelings, as I mentioned, and as you can see on your screen, that you have to actually admit what you are what you're actually doing, or what's your current situation, and then kind of redirect your thoughts. Okay, what can you do about it? And then don't worry about the future too much. Try to live in the present. And then of course, hand in hand with the diet is the exercise. Exercise actually tends to release various healthy neurotransmitters, chemicals, hormones that have very beneficial effect on our stress, and tends to lower the stress level. And then it's important to have a routine. And then active stress reduction, as I mentioned, doing dhikr. We are blessed to have these so many options, the options of meditation, prayers, connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then other options would be reading, having conversation with a good friend, just keep yourself busy with even household chores, and do something that is meaningful. So have kind of a positive, optimistic approach to whatever you are doing. Look at the glass half full rather than half empty. And then look at ways to help out in the community. I hope that answered your question. And then, as I mentioned, try to pick the foods that are basically stress reducing.
That was very helpful. So I have another question here. What do you recommend for a Ramadan diet in terms of food choices for fasting people? And when and how often to eat during the sunset hours?
Yes, that's, I was expecting that this will come. So I actually have a kind of a planner that, I haven't really put this together, but I was able to find this online. And, this is not something that I am actually promoting, but I want you to be kind of mindful of whatever you are eating. It should be kind of a balanced diet. So for example, let's look at day one, when they are, making recommendations about iftar, or let's start from sahur, when they are, mentioning drink 2 glasses of water. So you start with 2 glasses of water, and that's your fluids. You get your fluids from there. 1 cup of oatmeal. You're getting your, source of protein. You are getting your vitamins, and you are basically, it's also a source of complex carbs. And then you are getting, and then it combined with the fat-free milk, topped with bananas, and then 1 chopped date. So when you look at it, it's kind of a complete meal. And so think on these lines, basically, that when you are putting something together, you have, you're looking at all the categories that I had mentioned: the macronutrients, the micronutrients, and then the minerals. Again, then they talk about iftar. They say, you take 3 dates and then 2 glasses of water, and so you get your the fluid intake there. Then there is, you're getting and then they mention grilled chicken, which is a source of protein. And again, the way you cook your food is also important. You don't want to fry the food. It's better to grill it, or you can pan sear it. And then, 3 cups of your favorite salad. So you are getting your proteins here, your carbs here, and a handful of nuts. There goes your fats. And then, a cup of preferred tea and coffee. And then, they have mentioned exercise, which basically, again, there are some people who are in the habit of doing it. So the exercise doesn't have to be intense. It can be just a physical activity, walking after that for maybe half an hour. And then snack basically includes, I don't really recommend taking 2 cups of green tea here, but again, this was just a planner that was there, and I thought it would be worth discussing in case, if it comes up.
Can you speak a little more about overcooking vegetables and losing the nutrients? Is there something we'll be able to know ourselves while we're cooking the vegetables?
Yeah, so when I mentioned that, I was basically relating to typical Asian cooking, where we basically kind of fry and cook till the oil separates, and in doing that, we tend to lose the nutrients, and they're kind of modified. So that's why the best way to eat the vegetables is either in the form of salad, or in the form of, you can actually pan sear it, or I mean saute it, or you can steam it. 10 to 12 minutes is basically is our maximum. 15 minutes. We should not be cooking our vegetables beyond this time. If it's possible to eat them in the form of salad, you should eat them. For example, if we take spinach, the best way to eat spinach is in the form of salad. But if you cook it, after beyond like 10, 15 minutes, it tends to just, lose its nutritious value. So, you're putting in so much effort in prepping your meal, and then basically, the food that you're eating doesn't really have nutritious value.
Someone mentioned, how about just one meal a day?
So on the regular basis, this is something we don't recommend. Although there nowadays, people are following different kind of diets. We have intermittent fasting, where there are 8 hours of eating, followed by 16 hours of fasting. But then, people who are doing those diets, they are very mindful of what they're eating. So if you are not eating the whole day, and then the end of the day, you end up eating, unhealthy carbs, sugars, which in turn is going to have, adverse effect on the immune system. That is not recommended. So the idea behind eating small, frequent meals on a regular day, I'm not talking about the days of fast, or any, for people who are on a diet, or they're following a diet plan. On a regular day, just to kind of maintain your health, the idea is that if you eat small, frequent meals, and the healthy meals, the quality of food is also important. That tends to maintain your blood sugar. Our body tends to see adverse effects when we have either we miss a meal, or we eat unhealthy food, and that tends to stimulate, either because with the fluctuations in the blood sugar, there is insulin surge. So we eat, let's say, for example, we skip a meal, and we actually, for the next meal, we are so hungry that whatever we see, we eat, or we eat a high carb food. And that tends to stimulate the release of insulin. And what insulin does, it's actually an anabolic hormone. And what that means, it tends to deposit fat in our body. It tends to store glucose in the form of glycogen in the liver. And so it causes us to gain weight. And not just that, but it also has some inflammatory impact on our body. So that is not the best way it's not actually physiological to eat just one meal a day on a regular basis.
So another question, what's the ideal time to exercise in Ramadan while balancing all other tasks of the blessed month?
So I would say that every person is going to be different. I can't make a recommendation, and then I have another person. It's not suiting you. So what I would say is you have to figure out what works best for you. The best way for some people, doing early morning is best. For example, for myself, I do it early morning before eating breakfast, before anything. But for some people, doing later in the day or maybe in the afternoon is fine for them. But during Ramadan, the body is basically already is in a state of ketosis, and so basically you have to kind of see what exercise, the strength, the intensity of exercise, the kind of exercise suits you the best. So basically, as I mentioned, the SMART goal setting rule for determining what exercise works the best. So the timing, you have to determine that. Although doing early in the morning is physiological, but again, every person has a different way of exercising.
And another question, it's about vitamins. Is it sufficient to take a multivitamin, or do you recommend others as well, like vitamin D?
So excuse me, vitamin D is something that basically is very deficient in most of the people. When I see my patients, they almost 90% of them, they are deficient in vitamin D. So I would recommend, as far as vitamin D is concerned, take vitamin D on a regular basis. But as far as the rest of the vitamins are concerned, if you're eating a balanced, healthy diet, they are generally not required, but maybe, it may be a good idea to take a multivitamin during Ramadan, which so in case, if you are not able to get all of your nutrients, because again, we have to imagine that, our stomach also shrinks. And as we are fasting, so if you're not able to get all the nutrients, so it may not be a bad idea to take a multivitamin during that time.
Jazakallah, that was very informative. I actually have a question myself.
Yeah, sure.
Do you feel that nowadays the way the vegetables and the herbs are grown and fruits, that it's taking away from any of their benefits, like with fertilizers and hormones?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and and that when we talk about organic versus inorganic foods, organically grown foods, we talk about the fertilizers being less used, but even when we're talking about the organic foods, there are certain chemicals or the products that the organic industry is still allowed to use. They can still use these chemicals. So when we are eating organic food, that does not necessarily mean, especially I'm talking about vegetables and fruits, that does not necessarily mean that they are free of fertilizers. So, yes, they are, which is in less magnitude or amount compared to the regularly grown vegetables, which are not organic, but they still contain small amount. So I think the best way to do it would be to have your own vegetable garden, and it's a way to keep yourself busy as well. It's healthy for yourself as well. So and then again, genetically, they're genetically modified crops as well to that tend to basically lower the need for the the use of pesticides for them, because they're genetically modified, and they're not affected by the various insects. But in doing that, they lose their nutrient value. So what I recommend basically is that if one can, have your own vegetable garden, and try to grow your own vegetables and fruits. That would be just a way of keeping yourself busy, and you can just also teach kids as well. That's another great way to for the kids to learn about these different vegetables. kids who are picky, who don't like to eat fruits and vegetables. That's another, great way to teach them how to basically, grow these vegetables and what are the benefits of these vegetables, and and basically enjoy the so many gifts that we have from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Do we have any other question?
I think that's all for now.
Okay.
Yeah, Jazakallah so much for the presentation. It was
Oh, you're
very
welcome.
informative, and I know we all very greatly benefited from it.
Jazakallah khair. I appreciate giving me the opportunity to share this with the community, and please everyone, please remember me and my family in duas, and make keep the organizers of these programs. They're doing a wonderful job, keeping the community connected. So Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah, and thank you to everyone for joining and participating.